nurse receives an anonymous baby left at the hospital's emergency room. When she discovers who left it and why, she decides to immediately call 911. It was just past midnight when Sarah Matthews stepped out of the brightly lit corridor and into the muted hush of the Boston Memorial Emergency Department. She'd been working the night shift for years, long enough that this twilight world felt more familiar than sunlight and morning coffee. Tonight was supposed to be quiet. Christmas was only a few days away, and the usual flux of patients had thinned. Fewer accidents, fewer bar fights, fewer desperate calls in the frozen air. It granted a strange calm, as if the city itself paused in reflection. Sarah brushed a strand of auburn hair away from her face and moved toward the admitting desk. She took silent stock of the scene. A low hum of fluorescent lights, the distant beep of monitors, the antiseptic smell lingering in every corner. Her colleague, Jay, nodded at her as he handed over a chart, and Sarah smiled absently. No urgent traumas tonight, just the usual mix of minor pains and seasonal flu cases. But the silence felt heavy, almost expectant. She sensed it, a subtle tension in the air that had settled on her shoulders when she stepped through the hospital's automatic doors. After so many years, she'd learned to trust those instincts. Something was coming. She just didn't know what. A static crackle sounded from the overhead speakers, followed by a muffled voice. Sarah couldn't quite make out the words, but moments later a security guard walked briskly toward the emergency entrance. Curious, she followed, slipping her stethoscope into her pocket. Outside, beyond the tall sliding glass doors, the winter night pressed close and cold. Snow flurries danced beneath amber streetlights. She found the guard kneeling beside a small cardboard box placed near the entrance. He looked up as she approached, his expression incredulous and concerned. The box was lined with a woolen blanket. Inside lay a newborn baby, cheeks flushed pink against the cold, eyes squeezed shut, tiny mouth puckered in a silent plea. Sarah's heart lurched. She knew what this was, an abandoned infant. It wasn't common, but it wasn't unheard of either. Quickly, she took control. "We need to get him inside," she said, voice steady, even as anxiety flared inside her. The guard nodded, relieved to have someone take charge. With gentle hands, Sarah lifted the baby and hurried into the warmth of the ER. She guided him into an exam room, calling out for a pediatric attending and a warmed incubator. Within minutes, a small team had gathered. Another nurse, a young resident, the pediatrician on call. The baby, a boy by all appearances healthy, was gently checked over. Sarah noted he didn't seem injured or malnourished. Just a few hours old, if that. His umbilical stump was neatly clamped. Whoever left him had cared enough to do so properly. While the doctor examined him, Sarah took a closer look at the blanket. It was wool with a distinctive pattern of greens and browns that felt oddly familiar. She frowned, trying to recall where she'd seen it before. The thought drifted out of reach, so she made a mental note and focused on standard procedure. Contacting Child Protective Services, notifying security, running a standard newborn panel. As she turned the blanket in her hands, she noticed something lodged in its folds. A piece of paper, crumpled. She unfolded it carefully. A single phone number scrawled in rushed handwriting and 3 words beneath. "I'm so sorry." Sarah's eyes narrowed, the loops and whirls of the handwriting tugging at her memory. Her pulse quickened. There was something here, something she should remember. At her shoulder, the pediatrician spoke softly. "He's stable, Sarah. No obvious issues. We'll admit him for observation, of course." "Of course," she replied distractedly, still studying the note. That handwriting. Her gaze drifted back to the baby, sleeping now beneath the gentle glow of the incubator's lamp. A wave of protectiveness washed over her. He was safe for the moment, safe and warm, but someone out there was desperate and terrified. She could feel it in those 3 words. "I'm so sorry." Those words, and that blanket would not leave her mind. In the quiet hum of the ER, Sarah stood staring at the sleeping infant, a mixture of compassion and unease tightening in her chest. The night had just begun. Morning hadn't come yet. The dark sky still stretched over Boston. Sarah moved about the ER with a purposeful hush, checking the baby's vitals every hour, ensuring the staff was following protocol. The standard procedure for an abandoned infant was clear, but Sarah's intuition told her this was no ordinary case. She tried to remember where she'd seen that blanket before. It had a unique pattern, green squares intersecting with diagonal brown lines. It looked handmade, perhaps knitted or woven by someone who cared enough to put time into it. That, in itself, was a clue. You didn't wrap a baby in just any old rag if you intended to leave him on a hospital's doorstep. This was personal. At around 3 in the morning, when the ER had fallen into a lull, Sarah took a quick break at a computer terminal. She sipped lukewarm coffee and thought about the patients who'd come through recently. 2 weeks ago, a teenage girl had arrived complaining of severe abdominal pain and nausea. Emily Carson. Sarah remembered the girl's delicate features, the pale face contorted in discomfort, and the way she'd insisted it was food poisoning. Sarah had doubted that story. She pulled up the records. Emily Carson, 16 years old, daughter of Dr. Richard Carson, a renowned cardiac surgeon at Boston Memorial. The Carsons were hospital royalty in a way. Well-respected, wealthy, their patriarch a figure of local prestige. The day Emily came in, Sarah had tried to probe gently. The girl's pain didn't quite line up with her claims, and Sarah had suspected the possibility of pregnancy, something the young patient vehemently denied. But that blanket, 2 weeks ago, Sarah had seen Emily clutching something similar, maybe a sweater or shawl, bearing the same pattern. Could it have been part of a set? The realization sent a prickling up Sarah's spine. If Emily had been pregnant and had recently given birth, this abandoned infant could be hers. She carefully cross-referenced Emily's chart. No official pregnancy test had been done then. Emily had refused, and the attending physician had discharged her with a note suggesting follow-up if symptoms persisted. Sarah's gut had told her more was going on, but the girl's fear was palpable. Something had kept Emily from telling the truth that night. The mere thought made Sarah's chest tighten. If this was Emily's baby, why would she leave him here? Was she afraid, ashamed, or coerced? Sarah's eyes flicked to the note again, the trembling hand that wrote, "I'm so sorry," telling a story of desperation. She ran the phone number in a hospital directory search, but it yielded no direct match. Still, this had to be connected. Within the next hour, she discreetly asked a colleague who worked in the pediatrics ward if they recalled seeing Emily Carson recently, or if they knew of any family concerns. Her colleague shrugged, offering only that the Carsons were always in and out for one reason or another: donations, board meetings, and Dr. Carson's constant presence. Satisfied she had a thread to pull, Sarah went back to the infant. Standing over the incubator, she touched the side gently, as if to reassure the boy through the plastic barrier. He stirred slightly, still dreaming. "I'll find out what happened," she whispered softly. "I promise." The more she thought about Emily Carson, the more certain she became. The baby was hours old, and Emily had been in suspicious distress 2 weeks prior. If Emily had given birth without proper medical care, the situation was dangerous. Even more troubling was the question of why the baby was left here. Reputations at stake? Family pressures? This was Boston Memorial, where powerful names carried weight and not all truths were spoken aloud. Sarah felt a familiar ache. She had seen too many quiet tragedies hidden behind polite facades. She couldn't let this one slip away. She had to know. Her shift would end soon, but before it did, she made a decision. She'd confirm Emily's connection. She'd find the truth. By the time Sarah's shift ended, a pale dawn had begun to lighten the sky outside. Instead of going home, she took a detour to the cafeteria, grabbing a fresh coffee and a bagel she barely tasted. The hospital's day shift had started flowing in. Doctors and nurses in crisp uniforms, administrators in suits, and Dr. Richard Carson himself, tall, silver-haired, and impeccably composed, passing through the lobby with a confident stride. He looked every bit the part. Polished, respected, paternal in his demeanor with colleagues. He spoke in low, reassuring tones. The staff admired him. Patients thanked him. The hospital board trusted him. This was the man whose daughter Sarah suspected was tied to the abandoned infant. Sarah watched him from afar, gauging his mannerisms. Nothing seemed out of place. Information came in fragments. Sarah overheard small pieces in conversations at the nurse's station. How the Carson family lived in an upscale neighborhood. How they were always donating to the pediatric wing. How Emily attended a prestigious private school. The Carsons, to all appearances, were perfect. But Sarah knew well that perfection often hid darker truths. She recalled Emily's fearful eyes that night 2 weeks ago. The girl had seemed cornered, desperate to tell something but too frightened to speak. To crack the veneer, Sarah decided a direct approach wouldn't work. Richard Carson was too influential, too careful. She needed to reach Emily directly. Hospital policy discouraged staff from contacting patients outside official channels. But Sarah felt that this was no ordinary situation. Human lives were at stake, and if Emily was indeed the baby's mother, she needed help. Sarah knew enough about teenagers to try a more modern route: social media. She remembered Emily's last name in school from the medical file, and with a few cautious searches, she found Emily's social media profile. One carefully curated, but with recent silence. No posts, no updates. Sarah hesitated. This was a violation of normal boundaries, but how else could she reach Emily privately? She typed a short, gentle message. Emily, I'm the nurse from Boston Memorial. I need to make sure you're safe. Please respond if you can. She hit send, her heart pounding. She returned to the ER, checked on the baby, named John Doe for now, and waited. Hours trickled by. During a lull, she checked her phone. A new message. Who are you? Just 2 words, but they were from Emily's account. Sarah's pulse quickened. My name is Sarah. I was working the night you came in a few weeks ago. I think I know what happened last night. She paused, considering how to phrase it. The baby is safe. Several minutes passed before Emily replied. Safe? Another pause. Then, I'm sorry. I can't talk here. The abruptness of the message told Sarah Emily was not alone. Fear dripped off the pixelated words. The girl was in trouble. Sarah felt a chill run through her. Emily was in hiding, figuratively or literally, and terrified. The Carson facade might have been perfect, but cracks were appearing. Sarah needed more information and decided to confide in a colleague who'd worked in social services before. In the staff lounge, she found Paula, a social worker now doing a rotation in the ER. Quietly, Sarah explained her suspicions. Paula sighed. The Carsons, she began, then lowered her voice. Look, everyone knows Dr. Carson is controlling. He demands perfection. There have been rumors, just rumors, of how strict he is at home, but no one wants to cross him. He's too valuable to this hospital's reputation. Sarah's stomach turned. If Emily had been forced to abandon her own baby to protect the family image, what else had been forced upon her? By the end of the day, Sarah had learned everything she needed to know. The Carsons were indeed the perfect family, at least on the surface. Beneath, there lurked something else. Something that made Emily too frightened to speak and left a newborn baby in a box outside the ER. Sarah would have to dig deeper, but for now she had reached Emily, and it was a start. As the sun set again and she prepared for another night shift, Sarah closed her eyes and steadied herself. She had a promise to keep, to a baby who could not yet speak and a girl who could not yet scream for help. Midway through Sarah's next shift, she received another message from Emily. I can't talk long. He watches me. It was the confession she'd feared. Sarah typed a careful reply. Who watches you? Your father? Are you safe? No, came the answer. Then, in a sudden torrent of messages, he found out. About the baby. Made me leave him there. Said he'd fix everything. He threatened me and my mom. He's been hurting us for a long time. Sarah's throat tightened. She closed her eyes, picturing Emily, a 16-year-old girl trapped in her own home, forced to abandon her child by a father who wielded power like a scalpel. The baby wasn't just abandoned. He was placed there as part of a plan. Richard Carson wanted no loose ends. Sarah could sense a pattern. Abuse hidden behind prestige, silence enforced by threats. She knew what she had to do. She was a mandated reporter, obligated by law to report child abuse. But this was no simple call to 911. Richard Carson's influence ran deep. A single call could be buried, twisted, or worse, leave Emily even more vulnerable. Sarah had seen powerful individuals crush inquiries under the weight of their connections. She needed a strategy, allies, evidence. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, "I believe you, Emily. I will do everything I can to help. But I need something more. Proof. Can you tell me anything I can use to protect you?" There was a long silence. Sarah stared at the screen, heart pounding. Finally, Emily replied, "Hospital records. 2 weeks ago. He told them I had food poisoning. I was pregnant. He knew. He made me lie." Sarah inhaled sharply, remembering that night all too well. Emily's medical record would show her symptoms. If Sarah could link the baby's DNA to Emily, that would be undeniable proof. But paternity tests took time. Meanwhile, Emily was in danger now. During a quiet moment in the ER, Sarah stepped outside to the ambulance bay and called Detective Lisa Martinez, a contact in the Special Victims Unit she'd met years ago. Lisa was a no-nonsense investigator, known for taking on challenging cases. "Lisa," Sarah said into the phone, her breath forming white puffs in the cold air. "I have a situation involving a powerful family, abuse, and an abandoned baby." Lisa's voice on the other end was cautious, but intrigued. "Tell me everything," she said. Sarah did, omitting the details that could incriminate her for reaching out too soon. Lisa didn't promise miracles, but she listened carefully. They agreed to keep the line of communication open. Inside, Sarah noticed subtle changes. A hospital administrator hovered near the nurse's station more often than usual. A few doctors avoided eye contact with her. Had Richard Carson already gotten wind of her involvement? He was a man who valued control, and if he suspected Sarah of meddling, he would not stand idly by. Later that night, Sarah checked her phone. Another message from Emily. "He knows someone contacted me. He's angry. I'm scared." Sarah gripped her phone tightly. She was too far into this to turn back. Emily needed help now. She steeled herself, knowing that the coming confrontation would be ugly. But if she didn't act, who would? As the ward settled into the hush of early morning, Sarah resolved to find tangible evidence. She would access old hospital records, document every threat, every suspicious detail. She would speak to colleagues quietly, gather their observations. If Emily's story was true, and Sarah had no doubt it was, then Richard Carson had orchestrated a cover-up of monumental cruelty. Before her shift ended, Sarah stood once more beside the baby's incubator. She gently touched the plexiglass, looking at his tiny face. In a way, he was the key. He represented truth, a silent witness to all that had happened. "I won't let you down," she whispered, her voice steady in the stillness of the ER. In the days that followed, tension coiled through the hospital corridors like a living thing. Sarah felt it in every polite smile that didn't quite reach the eyes of her superiors, in every question asked a bit too casually by administrators who once paid her no mind. She knew Richard Carson was exerting pressure behind the scenes, testing the boundaries of what he could get away with. The man was not just a surgeon, he was a figure of influence on boards, committees, philanthropic circles. He had the means to make her life very difficult if he chose. Sarah responded by working quietly and deliberately. She gathered copies of Emily's medical records, highlighting the inconsistencies between her reported symptoms and the hospital's failure to confirm pregnancy. She recorded the exact time and place the baby was found, cross-referenced it with the hospital's security footage, though that footage mysteriously showed only a shadowed figure placing the box at the entrance. No clear face, but the action was caught on tape. A break came when Catherine Carson, Emily's mother, made a quiet appearance in the ER. She claimed to be there to visit a friend's child, but Sarah recognized the tightness around the woman's eyes, the way her hands shook slightly as she asked a nurse for directions. Sarah followed her to a quiet corner and gently introduced herself. Catherine looked startled, afraid. "Mrs. Carson," Sarah began softly, "I'm the nurse who found the baby." She let the words hang in the air, and Catherine's face went pale, lips pressed tight. Her eyes darted down the corridor, ensuring they were alone. "I just want to make sure that Emily is safe." Catherine's eyes filled with tears she dared not shed. I don't know what you mean, she whispered, but her quavering voice betrayed her fear. Sarah recognized the pattern. A woman living under an oppressive shadow, terrified to speak the truth. She pressed gently, "Your daughter needs help." She reached out to me. "Please." For a moment, Catherine's mask slipped. She cast a desperate look at Sarah, pain etched into every line of her face. "Be careful," she said, voice barely audible. "He knows people. He can ruin careers. He can." She trailed off, panic flaring as footsteps sounded nearby. Without another word, she turned and hurried away, leaving Sarah with a hollow feeling in her chest. That brief encounter told Sarah everything she needed to know. Catherine Carson was trapped, too. Trapped in the same cycle of abuse and control that ensnared Emily. It emboldened Sarah. She had to protect them both and the baby from this man. Soon after, Richard Carson confronted her. It happened late in the evening, when the ER quieted for a moment. He approached Sarah as she scanned a patient's bracelet at the nurse's station. The way he said her name was smooth, polished. "Nurse Matthews, I understand you've taken a particular interest in a foundling case from a few nights ago?" Sarah turned to face him, meeting his gaze. Up close, he was imposing, tall, with a commanding presence and a calm, clinical demeanor. "As a nurse, I'm interested in all my patients' well-being," she replied evenly. His smile didn't reach his eyes, of course, but some cases are sensitive. It would be a shame if undue rumors began to circulate about certain families, especially those who've done so much for this institution. "I trust your discretion in handling the matter." There it was, the veiled threat. Sarah felt her heart pound, but she held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "My only duty is to the patient's best interest," she said quietly. "I follow the law and hospital protocol." Dr. Carson's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. "I'm glad to hear it," he said, then added, "I'd hate to see your career suffer because of a misunderstanding." He turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Sarah stood there, her blood pulsing hot in her veins. The threat was made subtle but unmistakable. Yet, if he was resorting to intimidation, it meant he was worried. That night, Sarah documented the encounter in a private journal. She also confided in Detective Martinez, who advised her to be cautious but persistent. Martinez suggested involving Child Protective Services as soon as they had more concrete evidence. Sarah agreed. She'd collect more testimony, more records, and ensure that she involved multiple agencies simultaneously. Too many threads for Carson to cut. As the shift wore on, Sarah discovered a quiet ally among the staff. One of the pediatric nurses, Irene, approached her in the supply closet. Irene had noticed bruises on Emily's arm when she visited the ER, bruises hidden under long sleeves. She had tried to inquire gently at the time, but Emily had clammed up. Now, Irene offered to give a written statement if needed. This gave Sarah hope. She wasn't alone in this. She had the baby's records, Emily's cryptic messages, Catherine's frightened warning, and Irene's willingness to speak. Slowly, she was building a case too big to ignore. As dawn approached, Sarah stood outside the incubator, watching the baby breathe in steady, peaceful rhythms. He was doing well, responding to careful feeding, his vitals stable. The only sign of his traumatic start in life was the absence of a family to hold him. Soon, Sarah vowed that would change. She would not let silence settle over this tragedy. She would push forward until Emily, Catherine, and this baby had a chance at a safe, honest life. Returning to the nurse's station, Sarah picked up the phone and prepared to make a call. It was time to reach out to Child Protective Services. She would not give Richard Carson another day to tighten his grip. The silence he demanded would not prevail. Sarah's voice would rise in its place, carrying the weight of all the truths hidden behind closed doors. The next morning, Sarah returned to the ER with a resolve that felt like steel in her spine. She had slept only a few hours in a cramped apartment filled with piles of medical journals and a half-eaten dinner growing cold on her counter. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her chest. She had already made informal calls to both Child Protective Services and Detective Lisa Martinez, and now it was time to set things in motion more formally. Every piece of evidence would need to align, every testimony carefully preserved to withstand the pressure Richard Carson was sure to exert. Her first stop was the hospital's digital record system. Sarah logged in at a secluded terminal behind the nurse's station and methodically pulled up Emily's ER records, the baby's admission notes, and the surveillance footage logs from the night he was left. This time, she wasn't just glancing. She downloaded, printed, and stored electronic copies on an encrypted thumb drive she'd brought from home. She knew that if someone tried to wipe these files from the hospital's mainframe, she would still have them. But Sarah needed more than just digital footprints. She needed human voices and written statements. Irene, the pediatric nurse, kept her word. In a quiet supply closet, Irene handed Sarah a neatly typed statement on hospital stationery, signed and dated. In it, she detailed how Emily Carson had presented subtle signs of abuse. Bruises, flinching at sudden movements, a haunted look in her eyes. Though Irene had no concrete proof at the time, she had documented her concerns in a private journal. Now she was willing to go public if it meant protecting Emily and the baby. "I should have said something before," Irene said, voice trembling slightly. He's such a powerful man, Sarah. I was afraid." Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her colleague's arm. "We were all afraid, but we're changing that now." From there, Sarah reached out to the hospital's social worker, Paula, who had once hinted at rumors regarding the Carson family. Paula was cautious, eyes darting around to ensure they were not overheard. She refused to put anything in writing yet, not without legal protection. But she promised to speak with Child Protective Services when they arrived, to corroborate patterns of intimidation that staff had quietly mentioned for years. As Sarah moved through the hospital corridors, she felt eyes following her. The tension was as thick as hospital disinfectant. A few administrators gave her curt nods. Others looked away, as though her presence reminded them of something they'd rather not confront. A technician in radiology approached her in the hallway. "I heard what's happening," he said softly, handing her a sealed envelope. "My cousin works in CPS. Here's her direct line. She'll make sure this doesn't get buried." It was a kindness Sarah hadn't asked for but desperately needed. In situations like this, every ally mattered. Before noon, Sarah slipped into an empty patient room and made a secure call. She reached out to Detective Martinez first, her hand shaking slightly as she held the phone. Martinez answered on the second ring. "Lisa, I have documents, a nurse's statement, digital records. The baby's safe here at the hospital. I'm going to initiate official reports with CPS," Sarah said. Martinez's response was firm. "Good. Once CPS is involved, I can coordinate with them. We'll serve warrants if needed. Just be ready. Carson won't go down without a fight." Sarah hung up and drew a deep breath. She knew what that meant. Richard Carson would try everything: intimidation, influence over administrators, maybe even legal threats, to crush these efforts. She had to make sure multiple agencies got the information at the same time. That way, even if he managed to strong-arm one department, others would still move forward. She compiled an email addressed to both CPS and the local precinct, attaching the evidence files. She also mentioned Detective Martinez's name to signal that law enforcement was in the loop. After hitting send, her heart thumped loudly in her ears. She rechecked on the baby, who had begun to make soft cooing noises. He looked healthier by the day, a testament to simple care and warmth. In the crib beside him was a new plush bear that a volunteer had donated. Sarah gently stroked the infant's head. "Your mother needs us to be strong," she whispered. "We won't let him win." Shortly after, she noticed a senior administrator, Ms. Leahy, approaching her with a grim expression. "Sarah, I'd like to speak to you in private," Leahy said, leading her into a small meeting room. Inside, Leahy folded her arms. "What exactly are you doing, Nurse Matthews?" she asked, voice strained. "You've been accessing old records, contacting outside agencies. This could bring bad press to the hospital." Sarah stood her ground, spine straight, eyes steady. "I'm fulfilling my duty as a mandated reporter. A child was abandoned here, and I have reason to believe abuse is involved. I'm protecting my patient and that child's mother. It's the law, Ms. Leahy," Leahy's face tightened. Richard Carson is highly respected. Are you certain? Would you risk a child's safety on uncertain reputations? Sarah asked, heart pounding. I'm certain, and I have evidence. I suggest the hospital cooperate. This is no longer a matter that can be hidden. The administrator's stern mask faltered. She nodded once, curtly, and left without another word. Sarah could almost feel the hospital's walls trembling with the shift. By the end of the day, she had the evidence chain set. Multiple witnesses, official reports filed, backup copies secured, law enforcement contacts established, and CPS notified. Now all she could do was wait and see if the system would do what it was meant to do: protect the vulnerable. As the gray afternoon light dimmed through the hospital windows, Sarah pressed a hand to her heart, feeling it beat in steady determination. For Emily, for the baby, and for Catherine, she had to believe justice would prevail. The call from Child Protective Services came early the next morning, even before Sarah clocked in. They confirmed receipt of her report and arranged to send an investigator, Ms. Karen Oliva, to interview staff and examine the records that very day. The speed of the response surprised Sarah, but she suspected Detective Martinez and the direct line offered by the radiology technician's cousin had helped. The system, it seemed, could still be nudged into action if properly pressured. When Sarah arrived at the ER, she found Ms. Oliva already waiting in a private meeting room, clipboard in hand. She was a woman in her 40s, with kind brown eyes and a calm, measured demeanor. She asked Sarah to recount everything: the baby's discovery, the suspicious note, the connection to Emily Carson, the conversation with Catherine, and the threats from Richard Carson. Sarah laid it out carefully, supplying her printed documents and the nurse's statement from Irene. Ms. Oliva listened intently, her pen scratching notes. "You've done a lot of homework here, Ms. Matthews," she said, tapping the papers lightly. "We don't often see such a thorough collection of evidence from a single healthcare provider. Most are too frightened." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. "I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing." The CPS investigator offered a gentle nod. "I understand. We'll interview staff members. Reach out to Emily and Catherine Carson. We may need law enforcement present, given what you've shared. This could get complicated." "Detective Martinez is already informed," Sarah said, relieved. "She'll be on standby." By midday, Martinez arrived, flanked by a uniformed officer. Their presence caused a ripple of nervous energy to spread through the hospital corridors. A few doctors exchanged worried glances. Richard Carson was still performing surgeries upstairs, oblivious, perhaps, to the net tightening around him. Or maybe he knew and simply believed he could stop it. He had always stopped trouble before. Ms. Oliva interviewed Irene, who confirmed her statement. Paula, the social worker, timidly agreed to speak about the rumors and the subtle intimidation tactics that had allowed the Carson secrets to remain hidden. The security footage of the baby's abandonment was reviewed, and while it didn't show a face, the timeline could potentially place certain individuals on site. Background checks were run, and logs were examined to see who had accessed Emily's records over the past months. Sarah stepped outside for a breath of fresh air in the ambulance bay. Snow had begun to fall softly, dusting the pavement and the cars. She wondered if Emily was watching from a window in her family's home, feeling equally trapped behind glass. How would the Carsons react when Child Protective Services and a detective came knocking at their door? A soft ping from her phone. A message from Emily. "Something's happening. Men in uniforms at my house. Mom is crying. He's yelling. What did you do?" Sarah's heart seized. She typed back quickly. "I got you help. Don't be scared. Tell them everything. It's your chance to be safe." Long minutes passed before Emily replied. "He's threatening them. He says he'll have them fired." Mom finally told them everything. Sarah's eyes blurred with tears of relief. Catherine Carson had found her voice. For Emily and the baby, she had broken the silence. That was the first crack in Richard Carson's fortress of reputation. Inside the hospital, Martinez confirmed that Child Protective Services had just served an emergency protection order. Emily was being taken to a safe location, away from her father's reach. Catherine, too, was being separated for her own protection while statements were collected. The baby would remain in hospital custody until a legal guardian could be appointed and paternity confirmed. Things were moving swiftly, almost too swiftly for Sarah to process. The hospital administration, caught between loyalty to Carson and fear of legal repercussions, began to shift its stance. Ms. Leahy approached Sarah again, but this time her tone was deferential. "We're cooperating fully with the authorities, Nurse Matthews," she said. "If there's anything you need." Sarah resisted the urge to smirk bitterly. Now that the system had engaged, people were eager to align themselves on the right side of the law. "Just let the investigators do their jobs," Sarah replied evenly. By the end of the day, Emily and Catherine had given preliminary statements to CPS and Martinez. Emily disclosed the full extent of the abuse, the pregnancy hidden under threats of violence, the forced abandonment of the baby, the years of emotional and physical mistreatment. Catherine corroborated every word, tearfully confessing that Richard had hurt her as well, using his influence to isolate them. When Sarah heard the news, she leaned against a quiet hallway wall, tears rolling silently down her face. They had done it. The system had been forced to acknowledge the truth. There was still a long road ahead. Legal proceedings, custody hearings, but Emily and her baby were no longer voiceless victims. As the snow continued to fall outside, Sarah felt something lighten in her chest. They had broken through the silence. Now it was time for justice to follow. The confrontation at the hospital happened late in the afternoon, when Richard Carson stormed through the corridors, flanked by 2 hospital board members and his attorney. He demanded to see his daughter, to have a word with the staff who dared smear his name. But Emily was gone, whisked away by Child Protective Services. The baby was under guarded observation in the pediatric unit. His wife was speaking with the authorities and refused to meet him. He was alone in a fortress that had turned against him. Sarah watched from a distance, heart pounding. The hallway outside the ER was crowded with anxious staff. Dr. Carson's voice boomed, echoing off the polished floors. "I've given decades to this place," he shouted at Ms. Leahy. "Do you know who you're dealing with? I can bring lawsuits. I can ruin careers." Leahy's face was pale, but she stood firm. "Dr. Carson, there's an active investigation. Please cooperate with the authorities." He spun, eyes blazing, and caught sight of Sarah. Hatred flared in his gaze. He strode toward her, the attorney hot on his heels. "You," he snarled, his voice lower now but no less venomous. "You think you can destroy my family? You have no idea what you've unleashed." Sarah's knees felt weak, but she held her ground. "I didn't destroy anything," she said, voice steady. "I reported a crime. Your daughter and wife are safe now. That's what matters." His attorney reached out, trying to restrain him. "Richard, not here," the attorney hissed. But Dr. Carson couldn't let it go. "You're a nobody," he spat. "A night shift nurse. I'll see you fired, blacklisted. You'll never work in this city again." Sarah's jaw tightened. She was scared, no denying that, but fear didn't silence her now. She thought of Emily, forced to abandon her newborn, and found strength. "Try," she said quietly. "We have evidence. We have witnesses. Your threats mean nothing anymore." At that moment, Detective Martinez stepped forward, badge gleaming. "Dr. Carson," she said, voice firm, "we'd like you to come with us. We have questions for you regarding the allegations of abuse and the abandonment of your grandchild." He whirled toward Martinez, stunned that his power didn't cow her. Security guards hovered nearby, ready if he tried to flee or turn violent. With shaky indignation, he sputtered, "I want my lawyer present." "He's right here," Martinez said, gesturing at the sweating attorney. "We're not placing you under arrest yet, but we strongly advise you to answer our questions." A hush fell over the corridor as Richard Carson allowed himself to be escorted away. This man who once commanded respect with a single glance now looked small and desperate, his carefully crafted public persona cracking like old paint. Once he was gone, the staff seemed to exhale collectively. Irene stepped up beside Sarah, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You were amazing," she said. Sarah shook her head. "I just did what anyone should have done," she said softly. Yet she knew that not everyone would have taken this risk. She glanced around at the cluster of nurses, aides, technicians. Some were crying quietly, others looked relieved. A few doctors wore conflicted expressions. It was never easy to see a colleague, especially a revered surgeon, exposed this way. But the truth was a blade that cut cleanly through appearances. Outside, the media had caught wind of the developments. Reporters gathered by the entrance, cameras rolling, seeking statements. The hospital's press officer struggled to maintain control. Sarah caught a glimpse of flashing lights, microphones extended like weapons. The public would know soon enough. Abuse, coercion, a prominent surgeon's fall from grace. Emily's story would be told, and the baby's abandonment would not be a forgotten footnote. Sarah withdrew from the crowd, seeking a quiet corner near an empty patient room. Her heart hammered. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. It was done, the silence broken. Emily and her mother had shown extraordinary courage, telling the truth even as Richard Carson threatened them. Now, with Detective Martinez and CPS involved, legal action would follow. The cycle of abuse had been shattered. Later that evening, as darkness fell again over Boston, Sarah looked in on the baby. He slept soundly, a soft blanket tucked around him. The storm had passed overhead, leaving him safe and protected. In a few days or weeks, a judge would decide his custody arrangements. Emily would be free to consider what she wanted for her child, free from her father's control. Sarah prayed that mother and child would find a way to heal. In the days following the confrontation, the hospital stirred with uncertainty and reflection. Rumors flew through the corridors, staff clung to fragments of gossip, and everyone tried to grasp how such horror had hidden in plain sight. Some wondered aloud if they should have known, if they should have asked Emily more questions. Others defended their silence, citing fear of Richard Carson's influence. But the system had functioned, haltingly, painfully, but it had. CPS took Emily into temporary protective care. Catherine Carson, shaken and remorseful, willingly testified against her husband. She admitted her complicity in silence, her fear of speaking out before, and made a public apology to Emily and the baby. The courts placed a temporary restraining order against Richard Carson, who was suspended from the hospital pending investigation. Criminal charges loomed for him, including child endangerment and domestic assault. For Emily, a new chapter began. She was given a safe place to stay, her basic needs met, and a counselor who specialized in trauma. With professional support, she was learning to tell her story without shame, to understand that none of this was her fault. She grieved for the normal adolescence she never had and the trust broken by the man who should have protected her. She ached for her baby, who remained temporarily in state care, but at least now she knew he was safe, too. Soon, she would have a say in his future, something unthinkable just a week ago. At Boston Memorial, policies began to shift. The administration reviewed their procedures for reporting suspicious injuries and potential abuse. Training sessions were scheduled to teach staff how to recognize signs of domestic violence and coercive control. The message was clear. Silence would no longer be tolerated. The price of pretending all was well was too high. Sarah found her professional relationships tested. Some colleagues avoided her, worried that her willingness to challenge a powerful figure might reflect badly on them. Others admired her openly, thanking her for doing what they wished they had the courage to do. Paula and Irene stood firmly by her side. Even Ms. Leahy acknowledged, quietly, that Sarah had acted rightly. One afternoon, as Sarah walked the quiet hallway to the NICU where the baby still lay, she encountered Catherine Carson. The woman looked frail but determined. The bruises on her psyche would take longer to heal than any physical wound. Catherine stepped forward hesitantly and said, "Nurse Matthews, I wanted to thank you for what you did, for giving us a chance." Sarah's heart clenched. She saw the regret and relief mingling in Catherine's eyes. "You did the hardest part," Sarah replied gently. "You chose to speak up. You protected Emily and your grandchild." Catherine's voice shook. "For too long, I believed we were powerless. You showed me we weren't." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photograph. It showed Emily and Catherine in happier times, before things deteriorated, both smiling on a summer's day. Emily asked me to give you this. She wanted you to know she's grateful. She said you saved her life. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she accepted the photo. Tell Emily I'm proud of her, Sarah said softly. A few doors down, she stepped into the room where the baby rested. A social worker sat nearby, filling out forms. The baby kicked gently at the blankets, gazing at Sarah with wide, unfocused eyes. She brushed a finger along his tiny hand, marveling at his resilience. He wouldn't remember being abandoned at the hospital entrance. He would grow up, hopefully, in a safer environment, maybe with Emily if that's what she chose, or maybe with another loving family. What mattered was that his future was no longer dictated by secrets and threats. Outside, the media had covered the story extensively. Public sympathy flowed toward Emily and her child. Legal experts debated the Carsons case, and advocates for domestic violence survivors used it as a rallying cry for better systems of protection. Boston Memorial's board announced the creation of a new internal reporting hotline for staff who suspected abuse. Change was happening, born of crisis and truth-telling. That evening, Sarah returned home to her small apartment. She placed Emily's photograph on her kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. She realized that being a nurse was not only about treating physical ailments. Sometimes, it meant healing unseen wounds, standing up to bullies, and speaking out when silence became dangerous. The aftershocks of this ordeal would linger, but she had no regrets. A year later, on a crisp December morning, Sarah stood outside Boston Memorial Hospital, watching the flurries drift down much like they had that fateful night. The air was cold but fresh, the city busy with holiday preparations. She sipped her coffee and reflected on the transformation that had taken place, both in the hospital and in herself. Richard Carson faced trial and was convicted on multiple counts related to abuse and coercion. His medical license was revoked, his reputation dismantled. He awaited sentencing, no longer a powerful figure in a pristine white coat, but a man revealed as a bully and abuser. The hospital had moved on without him, staffing new cardiac surgeons who brought skill without tyranny. Emily, now 17 and attending therapy regularly, had made significant progress. With the guidance of her counselor and the support of social services, she decided to keep her baby. The court granted her custody under close supervision initially, ensuring she had resources, a safe home, parenting classes, ongoing mental health support. Catherine, separated permanently from Richard, had rebuilt her life. She worked part-time and focused on repairing her bond with Emily. Mother and daughter lived in a modest apartment surrounded by people who truly cared about them, not just their reputation. The baby, named Daniel, thrived under Emily's attentive care. He was a year old now, babbling happily, reaching for bright toys, smiling often. On weekends, Emily and Catherine took him to a nearby park. They were a family learning to be honest and gentle with one another, forging new traditions free of fear. Sarah had not stayed entirely on the sidelines. She visited them occasionally at a neutral meeting space arranged by social services. She watched Emily bloom from a terrified teenager into a caring mother, still fragile in places but determined to provide Daniel a life filled with love. They spoke openly about the past and about how silence nearly destroyed them all. Emily often said that knowing someone believed her made all the difference. At the hospital, a quiet revolution had taken place. Staff were now trained yearly on recognizing and reporting abuse. The hotline established by the administration helped nurses and doctors voice concerns without fear. Cases that once would have been buried were now addressed promptly. Sarah could feel the cultural shift in the way her colleagues talked, the way they looked out for one another and their patients. The weight of silence had lifted. Sarah finished her coffee and entered the hospital, checking in on the ward where she now split her time between the ER and a family advocacy program the hospital had launched. She helped guide families through the healthcare system, connecting them with community resources, mental health support, and legal aid when necessary. It felt like meaningful work, extending care beyond bandages and 4 drips into the realm of human dignity. After her shift, she made one last stop before going home. In a quiet corner of the pediatric ward's family lounge, Emily waited with Daniel in her arms, Catherine by her side. Sarah knelt down to the toddler's level, smiling brightly. Daniel giggled, reaching out a chubby hand to tug at Sarah's ID lanyard. "Careful, buddy," Sarah laughed. "That's not a toy." Emily's eyes shone with gratitude. She spoke softly, "I'm starting college courses next year. Part-time to be a child psychologist." She blushed, adding, "I want to help other kids who are scared, like I was." Sarah's throat tightened. "You'll be wonderful at it," she managed. Catherine placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. There was warmth and pride in that gesture. The three women and the child between them formed a circle of quiet understanding. Their story had been marked by pain, but it was not defined by it. Now they chose kindness, truth, and courage over silence and fear. As Sarah left the hospital that evening, the winter sky deepened into a soft indigo. The city lights shimmered on icy streets, and Christmas decorations blinked merrily in shop windows. She thought back to that night, a year ago, when she found Daniel wrapped in a green and brown wool blanket, a crumpled note whispering apologies. She remembered how heavy the silence felt then, how impossible it seemed that justice and healing would ever emerge. But they had emerged. Emily broke free, Catherine found her voice, and the baby grew strong in an environment of care. Sarah learned that true healthcare encompassed not just the body but the soul, and that sometimes the greatest cure was courage. In that realization, Sarah stepped forward into the cold December air, breathing deeply. She had done her part, all of them had. The weight of silence was gone, replaced by the clear, resonant sound of truth.